Imagine you have a rival. Maybe it's someone at school who always beats you on the spelling test. Maybe it's a sibling who always gets the last slice of pizza. Now, imagine that rivalry, but instead of spelling tests or pizza, you're fighting over the bones of giant prehistoric monsters. And instead of being annoyed for a day or two, you're so furious that you spend 30 years of your life trying to destroy each other. That is the story of Othniel, Charles Marsh, and Edward Drinker Cope. And it is one of the pettiest, most dramatic, most spectacular feuds in the history of science. Let's start at the beginning. The year is 1858. A young man named Edward Cope is 17 years old, already obsessed with fossils, and about to become one of the most talented paleontologists America has ever produced. He is brilliant, fast-thinking, and incredibly competitive. He could identify a new species of ancient creature the way most kids his age could identify a snack. A few years later, Cope meets a young scientist named Othniel Marsh. They are both passionate about fossils. They are both ambitious. They are both convinced they are the smartest person in any room they walk into. At first, they were friends. They write each other letters. They share discoveries. Marsh even named a newly found prehistoric salamander after Cope as a friendly gesture. Sweet, right? It did not stay sweet. In 1868, Cope made a mistake, a big one. He had been studying the fossil skeleton of a long-necked marine reptile called Elasmosaurus, a creature that looked like someone had taken a snake and attached it to the body of a turtle. Cope was so excited about his discovery that he rushed to publish his findings. He reconstructed the skeleton, wrote up his paper, and announced it to the world. There was just one problem. He had put the head on the wrong end. Yes. Edward Cope, genius paleontologist, expert in ancient creatures, had assembled an Elasmosaurus skeleton with the skull attached to what was actually the tail. Marsh noticed, and Marsh told him. In front of other scientists. Cope was mortified. He tried to buy back every copy of the paper he'd published so no one else would see the mistake. It didn't fully work. People had already seen it. And Marsh, rather than letting it go like a normal person, never let Cope forget it. He brought it up at conferences, mentioned it in letters, and wore the story like a trophy. The friendship was over. The war had begun. Now, to understand what happened next, you need to understand where they were fighting. In the 1870s, the American West was being explored and mapped for the first time by large numbers of settlers. And buried under the ground of places like Colorado, Wyoming, and Kansas were fossils. Enormous fossils. Bones from creatures that had walked the earth millions of years ago and were only just being discovered. This was the dinosaur gold rush, and Marsh and Cope were both determined to be the richest man standing. They each hired teams of workers, diggers, scouts, and collectors, and sent them out into the Badlands to find as many fossils as possible. Whoever found more species, named more creatures, and published more papers would go down in history as the greatest paleontologist of their era. It was science, technically. It was also absolutely unhinged. Simple enough, right? Except nothing about this was simple, because both men were willing to do almost anything to win. Cope's workers and Marsh's workers started operating in the same territories, and when that happened, things got ugly fast. Workers from one team would spy on the other team's dig sites, sneaking through the desert at night to see what had been found. Marsh reportedly bribed some of Cope's workers to feed him information, or better yet, to send bones directly to him instead of their actual boss. Cope did the same thing right back. There were accusations of trespassing, accusations of theft. At one point, a team of workers, it's not entirely clear which side ordered it, smashed apart a fossil dig site with hammers before abandoning it so that the other side couldn't excavate what was left. They destroyed dinosaur bones that had survived 65 million years just to make sure their rival couldn't have them. Let that sink in for a moment. These were grown men with PhDs. The dig sites themselves were often brutal, scorching heat, rattlesnakes, and terrain so rough that getting a wagon through it was its own daily adventure. The workers on both sides were tough, resourceful people doing genuinely dangerous work. Their bosses, meanwhile, were mostly writing furious letters from the comfort of the East Coast. The discoveries themselves, though, were genuinely extraordinary. Between the two of them, Marsh and Cope identified and named over 130 new species of dinosaur and other prehistoric creatures during the Bone Wars. 130. Many of the most famous dinosaurs you know by name today were discovered during this period. Marsh gave us Triceratops. He named Stegosaurus, the dinosaur with the plates along its back. He found and named Brontosaurus, though that one later got complicated, which is a whole other story, involving some very passionate scientists and a very long argument about naming rights that lasted over a century. Cope, not to be outdone, discovered dozens of species of his own: ancient fish, prehistoric mammals, and marine reptiles that had never been seen before. He was a faster writer than Marsh, which mattered because in science, whoever publishes first gets the credit. So Cope would sometimes rush his papers out so quickly that they contained errors. Marsh would then gleefully point out every single one. Marsh, meanwhile, was slower and more careful, but he had one enormous advantage. He had money. His uncle was a wealthy banker who funded his work generously. Cope had his own family money, but he eventually ran through most of it funding his fossil expeditions. By the end, Cope was reportedly living in a single rented room in Philadelphia, surrounded by fossils, with almost nothing left to his name. By the 1880s, both men were starting to crack under the pressure of their own rivalry. They had spent so much energy trying to outdo each other that their personal finances, their reputations, and their mental health were all taking serious hits. In 1890, they decided to take the feud completely public. Both men gave lengthy interviews to a major newspaper, each accusing the other of fraud, theft, data manipulation, and general scientific villainy. It was essentially the world's first viral scientific argument, just without the internet. The whole American scientific community took sides. It was spectacular and deeply undignified, and everyone read every word of it. Cope accused Marsh of stealing credit for discoveries made by his field workers. Marsh accused Cope of publishing false data. Both accusations had some truth to them. Neither man came out looking particularly noble. Edward Cope died in 1897, still bitter, still working, still convinced that history would prove him right. He donated his brain to science, partly as a genuine contribution to research, and partly, some historians suspect, as a final challenge to Marsh. He wanted his brain measured to see if it was bigger. Marsh never took him up on it. He died 2 years later, in 1899, having outlived his rival by just enough time to feel smug about it, but not long enough to enjoy it. So who won the Bone Wars? Honestly, nobody. And everybody. Neither man achieved the clean, decisive victory they were both desperate for. Marsh died with his reputation slightly more intact, having held prestigious university positions and government roles throughout his career. Cope died with less money, but arguably more raw scientific output. Some researchers consider him the more gifted, pure scientist of the two. But here's what they did together, even while trying to destroy each other. They transformed paleontology. Before the Bone Wars, dinosaurs were a curiosity, a handful of strange bones that scientists were only beginning to understand. After Marsh and Cope, there were museums full of assembled skeletons, textbooks full of newly named species, and a public that was completely captivated by the idea of prehistoric life. They gave us the dinosaurs, not just the fossils, the whole idea of dinosaurs as these magnificent, enormous, world-dominating creatures that once ruled the earth. Every dinosaur movie, every museum exhibit, every plastic T-Rex in a toy store traces back in some way to two furious men in the American desert, trying their absolute hardest to beat each other. The greatest scientific partnership in American paleontology was also its greatest rivalry. They never stopped hating each other. And the field they built together has never been the same since. All because one guy put a head on the wrong end of a skeleton.